An alien baron gave him his broken daughter as a joke. But man made her a galactic icon. Jonas had never imagined that his quiet life as a mechanic would change so dramatically. His shop, tucked away on the outskirts of a human-run colony, was a place where he worked with machines and tools, not people or politics. But everything shifted the day an alien baron, known throughout the galaxy for his cold sense of humor, walked into his shop with a broken daughter in tow. The baron's name was Verl, a powerful figure in the galaxy, feared by many for his ruthless dealings and unflinching control. But today, his usual arrogance was masked by something else, an almost casual indifference. He wasn't here for a trade, nor to make an alliance. No, Verl had come with an offer, one that would forever alter the course of Jonas's life. "Fix her," the Baron ordered, his deep voice carrying authority and menace. He gestured to the alien princess at his side, a young woman who appeared almost fragile in her state. Her limbs were twisted, her face was gaunt, and her eyes held a look of confusion, like someone who had seen too much of the world but understood very little of it. Jonas looked at the Baron, confused. "What do you mean, fix her?" Verl smirked. "She's my daughter, Alinar. She's been damaged physically and mentally by the experiments I conducted on her, but she's still valuable. If you can fix her, she'll be useful. If not, it's your failure." The Baron made it sound simple, but Jonas knew there was more to the story than that. A broken princess, an alien no less, left in the hands of a human mechanic. It didn't make sense. But what choice did Jonas have? He had no idea what the Baron wanted from him, but he knew one thing: if he refused, he might not live to regret it. Verl didn't wait for an answer. He pushed Alinar forward as though she were nothing more than a piece of property. "I'll return in a few days to check on your progress. Don't disappoint me." With that, he left, leaving Jonas standing in his shop, staring at the broken figure before him. Alinar's eyes were empty, her body barely functioning, and it was clear she wasn't just physically broken. Her mind had been shattered by whatever cruel experiments had been done to her. She was a victim, no matter what her father had said. Jonas sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had no experience dealing with alien life forms, let alone one as broken as this. He looked around his shop, the walls lined with tools, machinery, and various parts he had repaired for years. None of it had prepared him for this. "I didn't sign up for this," Jonas muttered to himself. But then he looked at Alinar again. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe fear, he couldn't tell. But in that instant, he knew he couldn't just send her back like the Baron wanted. He couldn't simply fix her to be another tool for someone else's games. He helped her sit on the workbench, her body shaking with the effort. He carefully examined her injuries, twisted limbs, bruises, cuts, and scars that seemed to tell the story of years of torment. It was clear that Alinar had been subjected to some kind of experiments, ones that left her both physically and emotionally scarred. The machines and technology that had been used on her weren't meant for healing. They were designed to change her, to turn her into something else. But it seemed they had only broken her more. Jonas didn't know what to do first. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't just let her fall back into the hands of someone like Verl. The Baron had no care for his daughter. She was just another pawn in his game. Jonas, on the other hand, felt a responsibility now. This wasn't just a job. This was something much bigger. Alinar had been abandoned, and it seemed no one was coming to help her but him. He moved quickly, gathering tools and equipment. He worked for hours, fixing the most urgent damage first, repairing her broken limbs with precision, using advanced human technology that was crude compared to what her species was capable of. But it was all he had. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder about her. What kind of life had she led before this? What kind of creature was she, and what did the Baron want from her? Why had he done this to his own daughter? Jonas found himself talking to her as he worked, though he wasn't sure why. She didn't respond at first, but he kept speaking anyway. "You're not alone, you know," he said, working on her leg. "I'm not sure I can fix everything, but I'll do my best." Alinar didn't speak, but her eyes followed him. Slowly, the tension in her body seemed to lessen as he worked. Maybe she was starting to trust him, or maybe she was too tired to care. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was still alive, and as long as that was true, Jonas would do everything he could to help her. After hours of work, Jonas finally stopped. He sat down beside her, exhausted. "I don't know what your father wants with you, but I do know this. I'm not sending you back to him like some broken tool." Alinar's eyes flickered, and for a moment she looked at him with a kind of quiet gratitude that Jonas hadn't expected. It was subtle, but it was there. She didn't have to speak for him to understand. She was grateful, grateful that someone cared, even if it was just a mechanic in a small colony. And that realization made Jonas's heart heavy. The Baron would be back in a few days. But by then, Jonas knew that Alinar would be more than just a broken princess. She would be someone who had been given a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, she would become something far greater than the Baron ever intended. But for now, Jonas focused on the task at hand. He would fix her. He would help her heal mind and body, and then they would figure out what came next. Together. The days passed slowly for Jonas as he worked tirelessly on Alinar's body, trying to fix what had been broken. Every day he would examine her injuries, making careful adjustments, repairing her limbs and soothing her bruised skin. Despite his best efforts, he could see that Alinar was far from healed. Her body was improving, but her mind was a different matter. She rarely spoke, only responding with the occasional glance or a small movement. Sometimes she would tremble slightly, as if in fear of something she couldn't escape. Jonas knew that something had happened to her, something horrible that had scarred her beyond just physical damage. But what? He couldn't be sure. The colony was quiet, mostly because Jonas kept to himself. He had never been much of a socializer, and now, with Alinar in his care, he found himself even more isolated. People passed by his shop, often stopping to stare at the strange alien woman who seemed so out of place. Some whispered, others gave Jonas a look of concern, but no one dared to approach. Jonas had no answers to give them. He didn't know why the Baron had chosen him to fix Alinar, or why she had ended up in his care. What did a simple mechanic have to offer an alien princess? What was he supposed to do with her? But in the quiet moments when he worked alone with her, Jonas realized that he couldn't just fix her and send her back. That thought had crossed his mind early on, when he first saw her in the shop, her body shattered by unknown forces. But the more time he spent with her, the more he saw that she was more than just an object to be fixed. She was a person. A broken person, yes, but a person nonetheless. Jonas would sit with her, speaking softly as he worked. He spoke about his life, about the colony, about his dreams of something bigger than fixing machines. He wasn't sure if she understood him, but it felt right to talk to her. In some strange way, it made him feel like he was doing more than just mending her body. He was connecting with her in the only way he could. Alinar, for her part, seemed to become more aware of her surroundings the longer she stayed with him. She would watch him with those strange alien eyes of hers, studying him in silence. She never spoke a word, but sometimes he would catch her looking at him with a mix of curiosity and confusion. It was as if she was trying to understand him, to figure out what kind of person he was. Jonas had always been a quiet man, never one for grand speeches or dramatic actions. But here, with Alinar, he found himself becoming something more. He wasn't just the mechanic anymore. He was something she needed, someone who cared for her, someone who would help her find her way. One morning, after several days of working, Jonas walked into the shop to find Alinar sitting on the workbench, her legs dangling off the edge. She was staring at the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jonas paused at the doorway, watching her for a moment before clearing his throat. "How are you feeling today?" he asked gently. Alinar didn't respond, but her eyes flicked up to meet his. It wasn't much, but it was a sign that she was paying attention. Jonas smiled softly, setting down the tools he had been carrying. "I've fixed your legs," he said, approaching her cautiously. "You should be able to stand now. We can start working on your arms next." "But I'll need your help, okay?" Again, no response. But Jonas didn't expect one. He wasn't sure if she even understood him, let alone trusted him enough to follow his instructions. He wasn't sure what was going on in her mind, but he was determined to help her, no matter how long it took. Slowly, he knelt in front of her, his hands reaching for her broken arm. He was gentle, trying to ease the tension in her body as he began to adjust the mechanisms within her arm, the ones that had been damaged during the experiments. He was careful, not wanting to hurt her any more than she already had been. Alinar stiffened slightly at his touch, but she didn't pull away. Jonas looked up at her, noticing the way her eyes followed his every movement, her gaze intense but distant. He wasn't sure what she was thinking, but he could feel her tension, as if she was waiting for something, waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting for the moment when she would be abandoned again. Jonas stopped for a moment, his hand still resting on her arm. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you, I just want to help." Alinar's eyes flicked down to his hand, then back to his face. She didn't speak, but there was a slight shift in her expression, a hint of something, recognition, perhaps, or maybe just a flicker of hope. It was small, but it was something. Jonas continued working, taking his time with each movement. It wasn't just about fixing her body. It was about building trust, something that would take time and patience. But Jonas was determined. He had no idea how long it would take or if the Baron would ever return to check on them. But that didn't matter to Jonas. What mattered was that Alinar was here, and he wasn't going to give up on her. Over the next few days, Alinar slowly began to show signs of progress. Her movements became less stiff, her eyes brighter, and there were moments when she would reach out for the tools, trying to help him with the repairs. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time since she arrived, she seemed to be more than just a broken princess. She was beginning to regain a sense of self, a sense of agency. One evening, after another long day of work, Jonas sat beside her as they both stared out at the setting sun. The colony's lights flickered on in the distance, casting a warm glow over the buildings. It was a peaceful sight, one that made Jonas feel like there was still hope, even in the darkest of times. "I don't know where we're going," Jonas said quietly. "But I do know this, I'm not sending you back to that Baron, he doesn't deserve you." Alinar looked at him, her expression unreadable. But Jonas felt a connection in that moment, something more than just a man helping a broken woman. It was as if they were both on the same path, both trying to find their way in a galaxy that didn't seem to care. "Together we'll figure it out," Jonas added, more to himself than to her. Alinar didn't respond, but for the first time she didn't need to. Her presence beside him was enough. Days turned into weeks, and Jonas continued working on Alinar. He had never imagined that fixing a broken body could be so complicated. But as time passed, he saw improvements, small but significant. Her movements were becoming less stiff, and she started responding to his instructions with more confidence. Alinar, once distant and disconnected, was starting to show signs of life beyond her broken shell. Jonas had fixed her legs, arms, and some of the more obvious injuries, but her mind was still the biggest challenge. He would talk to her as he worked, telling her stories about the colony, his childhood, and his hopes for the future. Sometimes he thought she wasn't listening. Other times he thought he saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. He didn't know how much she understood, but he felt like something was changing between them. One evening, as the sun set and the stars began to appear in the dark sky, Jonas sat beside her on the workbench, wiping the sweat from his brow. The shop was quiet, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the colony's power grid in the distance. "I never thought I'd be doing this," Jonas said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "Fixing a broken alien princess. I've fixed machines my whole life, but never anything like this." Alinar didn't respond, as usual, but her gaze was fixed on him, and Jonas could feel her attention on him, even if she didn't speak. He stopped expecting words from her. Actions spoke louder than anything, and her actions were beginning to show trust in him, in what he was doing for her. Jonas stood up and moved to the other side of the room, gathering the tools he needed for the next repair. He was starting to feel like he was running out of time. Every day, he knew the Baron could return at any moment. Alinar was healing, but she wasn't ready to face her father yet. She wasn't ready for what would come when he returned. Jonas wasn't sure what that would look like, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let the Baron take her back like some broken tool. She was more than that. She deserved something better. Later that night, as Jonas was preparing a meal for them both, Alinar did something unexpected. She stood up from the workbench, her legs a little wobbly, but her body still moving with more ease than before. She walked over to the table where Jonas was working, watching him closely. Jonas paused when he noticed her standing there. "You're up," he said, surprised. "How do you feel?" Alinar didn't answer, but she reached out slowly, as if unsure of what to do. Her hand rested on the edge of the table, and her eyes followed his movements as he finished preparing the food. Jonas smiled, relieved that she was moving around on her own. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Over the next few days, Alinar's progress seemed to accelerate. She started helping with simple tasks, like handing Jonas tools or cleaning the workbench. She still didn't speak, but her actions were more purposeful, more confident. She was becoming more than just a patient to him. She was becoming a partner, someone who was no longer lost in the shadows of her past. Jonas couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in her progress. She was healing, not just physically, but mentally as well. The more she trusted him, the more he realized how much potential she had. There was something special about Alinar, something beyond her royal blood and alien origins. She had strength, a strength that Jonas hadn't fully understood until now. One evening, as they sat together in the shop, Alinar did something even more unexpected. She picked up a small tool from the workbench and handed it to Jonas, then pointed to the broken machine in the corner. It was an old piece of equipment that Jonas had been meaning to fix but hadn't gotten around to. Alinar's gesture was clear. She wanted to help. Jonas looked at her, then at the machine. He smiled. "You want to help with that?" Alinar nodded slightly, her eyes never leaving him. "Well, all right," Jonas said, taking the tool she offered. "Let's see what you've got." Together, they worked on the machine, Alinar following Jonas's instructions as he showed her how to repair it. It was slow at first, and there were moments when Alinar hesitated, unsure of what to do next. But with Jonas's guidance, she quickly learned how to handle the tools and make the necessary adjustments. As the hours passed, they managed to get the machine up and running again. Jonas was impressed by how quickly Alinar picked things up. It wasn't just about fixing machines. It was about trust, about Alinar beginning to understand that she wasn't just a broken thing to be fixed. She was capable. She was strong. That night, as Jonas finished up the repairs and Alinar sat quietly beside him, he looked at her with a new understanding. She had come so far, and it wasn't just because of his work. It was because of her own will, her own desire to heal and move forward. "You're stronger than you think," Jonas said quietly, more to himself than to her. He wasn't sure if she understood the full meaning of his words, but it didn't matter. She didn't need to speak to show how far she had come. The next day, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. There were rumors circulating in the colony that Baron Veryl's ships had been spotted near the outskirts, and Jonas knew that it wouldn't be long before the Baron returned. He had no idea what would happen when that time came, but he couldn't worry about it now. Now he had to focus on Alinar and her progress. Alinar was ready. She had made more progress than Jonas had hoped for in such a short time. She wasn't just a broken princess anymore. She was someone with strength, with purpose, someone who could stand on her own 2 feet and face whatever came next. As the days passed, Jonas and Alinar worked together, side by side, fixing what was broken, both the machines and themselves. And as they did, they both knew that their journey was only just beginning. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The days grew longer, and the quiet life Jonas had built with Alinar seemed to settle into a rhythm. They worked side by side, repairing machines, learning from each other, and sharing small moments of calm. Jonas couldn't help but marvel at how far Alinar had come. She had gone from a broken, distant woman, almost lost in her own pain, to someone who was beginning to stand tall, to find a purpose beyond the cruel hands of her father. But the calm was never meant to last. One morning, as Jonas entered his shop, he saw something that made his heart stop: ships, dozens of them appearing on the horizon. The unmistakable markings of Baron Veryl's fleet were visible even from a distance. Jonas's stomach dropped. He had known this day would come, but the reality of it felt different. Alinar was no longer the weak, broken woman she once was, but she wasn't yet ready to face her father, not in the state she was in. They weren't prepared. Alinar stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the sky. She had seen the ships too, but instead of fear, there was only a strange calmness in her expression. It was as if she had already made up her mind. "Jonas," she said softly, her voice stronger than it had ever been before. "It's time." Jonas turned to face her, unsure of what she meant. He had spent so much time trying to help her, trying to protect her from the past, but now she seemed ready to confront it, ready to face her father. "I don't know if you're ready for this," Jonas said, his voice filled with concern. "You don't have to go. We can leave. We can run." Alinar shook her head. "I've spent too long running. I can't hide anymore." Jonas watched as she walked past him toward the door. She was different now, her movements steady and confident. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived. The princess who had been given to him as a joke was now a woman who had found strength within herself. The thought of her going back to face Veryl, the man who had abused her for so long, was terrifying, but he knew there was no stopping her. She had come so far, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. "I'll go with you," Jonas said quietly, standing by her side. Alinar turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. "You don't have to, but I want you by my side. You've helped me more than I can ever explain." Jonas nodded, understanding. She had changed, and so had he. They weren't just two strangers anymore, they were a team. He had helped her find her strength, and now it was her turn to show him what true strength looked like. The two of them walked outside, towards the edge of the colony where the ships were landing. Jonas could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the tension in the air thick with uncertainty. He wasn't sure what would happen when they faced Veril, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let her face it alone. As they reached the landing pad, a figure emerged from one of the ships. Baron Veril, dressed in his usual commanding attire, his cold eyes scanning the scene before landing on his daughter. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the anger that simmered beneath the surface. "Alinar," the Baron said, his voice sharp and cold. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble. I should have never trusted you to this mechanic." Jonas stepped forward, standing between Alinar and the Baron. "She's not your property anymore, Veril. She's not anyone's tool to use." The Baron's gaze hardened as he looked at Jonas, sizing him up. "You think you can protect her? She's mine, and I will take her back." Alinar stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "You don't own me. You never did. You used me, hurt me, and now you want to control me. But I'm done being your pawn." For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. The Baron's face twisted in anger as he stared at his daughter, his eyes narrowing with disbelief. "You dare speak to me like that? I gave you everything. I made you who you are." "You made me broken," Alinar replied, her voice growing stronger. "But I fixed myself. I don't need you anymore." The Baron's anger flared, and he took a step toward her, but Jonas was ready. He stepped in between them, blocking the Baron's path. "It's over, Veril. She's not your puppet. You can't control her anymore." The Baron's eyes flicked to Jonas, then back to Alinar. "You will regret this, child," he hissed. "I will make sure of it." Alinar stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "I've been through worse than you could ever do to me. You've already broken me. There's nothing left for you to take?" For a long moment there was silence. The Baron seemed to consider her words, his expression shifting from rage to something almost like disappointment. He took a step back, as if realizing that he had lost control of her. "You've made your choice," he said quietly, "but don't think for a second that this is the end." With that, the Baron turned and walked back to his ship, signaling his men to follow. Alinar watched him go, her expression unreadable. She had faced her father, and she had not flinched. She had taken control of her own life, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her again. Jonas stood beside her, watching the ships disappear into the sky. "You did it," he said softly. "You faced him." Alinar nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I had to. I couldn't keep running." Jonas looked at her, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. Alinar wasn't just a broken princess anymore. She was a leader, a force to be reckoned with, and he had been part of her journey. He had helped her find her strength, and in doing so, he had found something in himself, too. Together, they stood there in silence, watching as the Baron's fleet disappeared. The galaxy was full of challenges, but Alinar was no longer afraid of facing them. She had found her voice, and with it, a future of her own. The journey wasn't over, but Alinar had taken the first step toward a life that was truly hers. The days after the confrontation with Baron Veril were strange. The air in the colony felt different, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted. People started to treat Jonas and Alinar differently, as if they saw them in a new light. Alinar, the broken princess who had once been a pawn in her father's game, had become something more, something stronger. She was no longer the quiet, fragile woman Jonas had first met. Now she was someone with power, not just in her abilities, but in her mind, in her will. Jonas had never imagined he would be part of something like this. A simple mechanic fixing machines, helping an alien princess heal. He had never planned for any of this, but now that it had happened, he couldn't imagine doing anything else. Alinar wasn't just his responsibility anymore. She was his partner, and he was proud to be by her side. But even as they began to settle into this new reality, a new challenge loomed ahead. They couldn't stay in the colony forever. They couldn't hide away forever. Alinar was no longer just the daughter of a baron. She was a symbol, a leader. The galaxy was full of people who would try to use her for their own gain. Some would try to control her, others would fear her, and there would be those who would try to destroy her. Jonas knew that their journey was far from over. The Baron might have retreated, but others would come. They would always come. The only way to ensure Alinar's future was to take control of it themselves. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, Jonas and Alinar sat on the edge of the landing pad, looking out over the colony. The soft hum of machinery filled the air, but it was quiet, peaceful. Alinar looked over at Jonas, her face serious but calm. "What happens now?" Jonas looked at her, his brow furrowed in thought. "We keep moving forward. We can't stay here forever. You're not just a princess anymore. You're a leader, Alinar. People will be looking to you for guidance, for strength." A small smile tugged at Alinar's lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready to be a leader. I've spent so long running from my father, running from my past. How can I lead anyone?" Jonas turned to face her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're already a leader. You've been leading by example every day. You've shown everyone that you're more than just your past. You're not broken. You're strong. That's what people will see when they look at you." Alinar's gaze softened, and for a moment Jonas saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was brief, but it was there. She wasn't sure she was ready, and that was okay. She had faced so much, and she was still finding her place in the galaxy. But Jonas believed in her, and for now, that was enough. "We can't just hide away in the shadows," Jonas continued. "We have to make a choice. We can either run, or we can stand tall and show the galaxy who we are, together." Alinar nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Together," she echoed softly, as if testing the word on her tongue. She had spent so much time alone, locked away in a world of pain and manipulation. The idea of working with someone, of standing beside someone, was new to her, but now, with Jonas by her side, it felt right. She stood up, her movements confident but measured. "Then we move forward, we take control of our future." Jonas stood beside her, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. Alinar wasn't the same woman he had first met. She had changed, and so had he. They had both grown together. The next few days were filled with planning. Jonas and Alinar knew they had to act quickly. They couldn't afford to wait for more threats to come. They needed allies, people who would stand with them, people who would support Alinar's vision for the future. They reached out to the leaders of nearby colonies, offering alliances and support. The news of Alinar's strength and resolve had spread, and many were eager to join her cause. Slowly, they began to build a network of supporters, a network that would stand against the forces that had once sought to control her. But even as they made progress, the galaxy was full of dangers. The Baron's enemies had already begun to move, sending spies and mercenaries to find them. But Alinar was no longer the frightened princess she had once been. She was a woman on a mission, and she would not let anyone stand in her way. One day, as they were preparing to leave the colony and move to a more secure location, Jonas received a transmission. It was from an old contact, someone he had worked with in the past, someone who had ties to a larger network of rebels. The message was short, but the meaning was clear. They had found out about Alinar, and they wanted to join forces. Jonas relayed the message to Alinar, who listened intently. She didn't hesitate. "We take the offer," she said firmly. "The more allies we have, the better. We can't do this alone." Jonas nodded, feeling a sense of excitement build inside him. Alinar had found her voice, and now she was ready to lead. The galaxy was a vast place filled with dangers and opportunities, but together they could shape the future. Together they could fight for a new kind of peace, a peace where the galaxy was no longer ruled by fear, but by the strength of those who were willing to stand for what was right. As they prepared to leave the colony behind, Alinar turned to Jonas one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere, "for everything." Jonas smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because you deserve a chance. You deserve a future." Alinar nodded, and together they stepped onto the ship that would take them to the next chapter of their journey. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was all they needed. As the ship lifted off, the stars stretched out before them, a vast and endless sea of possibilities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The galaxy was big, but they were bigger, and together they would change it.